Hello, everyone, and welcome
Yeah.
to today's webinar, COVID-19, Demystifying Financial Programs and Resources. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. Due to the high capacity of this webinar event, computer audio will be used in today's session rather than a phone dial-in option. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing them into the questions pane of your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time, and we will address these during the Q&A portions. I would now like to introduce the Honorable Jane Campbell, Senior Fellow at the International Economic Development Council and President, CEO of the United States Capitol Historical Society.
Good afternoon, my friends. These are indeed trying times for all of us. And we are very fortunate to have a distinguished panel of guests who are economic development professionals in the field, working with small businesses. And we have, to start us off, a distinguished staff member from the Small Business Committee. Kevin Wheeler has been on the Small Business Committee through so many friends. That is the view from someone who's writing the law. Now we have 4 people who are dealing with implementing the law and working day to day with small businesses who are trying to recover from various kinds of disasters. The panel has been put together with a group of people who have been strong involved with IEDC. And, you know, for those of you who are on the call who are not IEDC members, I'm hoping that this really gives you a sense of the work of the International Economic Development Council. It is one of the best ways to just be in touch with each other and with the work that's going on here in Washington. So we will open the conversation with John Zakian, who is the National Disaster Resilience Grant Program Manager for the city of Minot, North Dakota. John has worked with a number of different kinds of disasters, and he is going to give us a sense of how you might approach your small business community, what he's done that's been successful, and some tips for taking the next step. So, John, take it away.
Thank you, Jane. Hopefully we're all going to provide you with helpful information and insight. I do not have COVID-19, but I do have a bad allergy, so if my voice breaks up, I apologize. My focus is going to be on medium and small sized communities and rural areas, but what I'm about to say applies to all of us. From all my experience, my first offer of guidance is that you need to keep in mind the perspective that this is the most unusual form of disaster that we have ever encountered in many, many generations. And there are going to be certain elements of the response in providing assistance and services that are highly unusual. What you're about to realize in the next day or so is that unlike tornadoes and hurricanes and floods, there are going to be no SBA disaster centers stood up. There are going to be no FEMA disasters stood up. Everything is either going to be done through online websites, through non-traditional sources, or through your state government. So if you're an EDO or a local economic development professional in any size government, but especially in small and medium-sized cities. By the way, Minot, North Dakota is 48,000 people. And what I'm about to share with you very quickly in the next 6 minutes is what I'm doing right now. So I'm kind of living what I'm going to pass on to you in terms of my experience. You need to become very well connected to your regional SBA office on everything that was described to you today. You are going to become whatever form of economic development entity you are in your community. You are going to become a primary source of information. You're going to find that you're going to be more in demand for answering questions or pointing people to the correct resources than you are necessarily in being asked to create new disaster recovery programs. As you heard from the previous speaker, the primary methodology for getting out these paycheck loans is going to be through local lenders. If you do nothing else in the next 2 days, if you don't already have it, make sure that you get a comprehensive list in your community for all your 7A commercial bank lenders. It also will not hurt to also get a list of all your SBA 504 commercial bank lenders, because they're going to be the source of getting out these loans. Now, they can do it directly, and if I understand correctly, you can also begin the process online. The economic injury loans, traditionally those loans get started at the SBA disaster loan centers that are stood up and operational for months in communities that are affected. All those now are only going to be done online. So it's very important for everybody on this call to really become familiar with that process. I would also encourage you, whether you have a council of government, economic development district, a planning district, whatever the format is, make sure, if you're not already, to partner with them. If you are about to get inundated from SBA, EDA, and probably also your state community development block grant, small cities program, because you're going to become, or the entity is going to become, a primary source of technical assistance and information. Now, along those lines, also in the CARES Act, and by the way, I know it's an awesome task to suggest. It is 335 pages long, but if you can have the time and the capacity, maybe with a few drinks, read it, because there are a lot of pieces in it that are going to generate questions. What was quickly referenced in the previous call is that there are certain payroll tax credits, and the problem is that the decisions are going to have to be made by your small businesses as to whether they pursue the paycheck loan or these tax credits. You can only do one or the other. And one of the underlying challenges we're all going to face at whatever level of community or government or EDO you're involved in is we're going to be getting inundated, especially with all these small businesses, on looking for guidance on which way to go. Should they take the tax credit? Should they take the PPP? Should they take the economic injury loan? I'm not suggesting that you necessarily have to become the end-all advisor, but you need to be prepared to be able to at least facilitate getting those questions answered. Because even though the good news is that in this CARES Act, there are a lot of potential opportunities to help small businesses, they're going to have to start making decisions. And I'm sure you all live this, but most of your small businesses are not 500 or less. Most of your small businesses are 10 or less. Many are going to be sole proprietors. Many are going to be 2 or 3 micro enterprises, 2 or 3 employee micro enterprises. They're not going to have the sophistication of being able to reach out to financial advisors, accountants. So be prepared to be asked to be those roles, but don't necessarily be those roles, but be able to funnel them to other resources. I can only speak from my experience here, but your traditional SBA partners, which in this case are the Small Business Development Centers and SCORE, they're not fully briefed yet on what's in the CARES Act. They can become resources for you, and if you have them, partner with them, because they do and will have the financial expertise or guidance to help small businesses. So again, as my 7 minutes is wrapping up, I would encourage you to focus on becoming a source of technical information and technical assistance. I would not spin your wheels trying to invent new programs to pour more money into your communities, because at this point, there is sufficient funding coming through at the federal level to at least begin to address the issues. But the biggest challenge is going to be for small businesses on how best to access that money and how best to use it. And Jane, I think my 7 minutes is up, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much, John. I really appreciate it. And what we're going to do is we're going to have each speaker speak from their perspective. And as we had with Kevin's conversation, the chat box is open for questions, and I will try to be looking at those and see if I can, flag those as we move forward. So our second presenter is Brett Doney from the Great Falls, Montana Development Authority in Great Falls. Brett has been a real champion of economic development, particularly in some of our smaller communities. And so you've been through a lot of different activities and disasters and recessions and whatnot. So Brett, can you share some of the thoughts about some of the, it's not just SBA that we have here. It's other, we have other kind of opportunities. So I know that you've been particularly experienced in working with the Economic Development Authority's revolving loan funds. So maybe you could kind of expand people's thoughts to other ideas about ways to work. Brett, take it away.
Jane, I'd be happy to. Those of you who have existing revolving loan funds, whether it's EDA or USDA IRP or other loan funds, our role is to continue to do what we've always done, which is to fill the gaps and provide the bridges that other lenders can't. We are not just the lenders of last resort, but we're also the lenders that can be the quickest and the most flexible. So I've been getting a lot of questions as to, well, how flexible can we be? And there are two issues to take in mind. One is protecting the organization's health, your EDA's, your EDO's financial health. And you have to decide what your risk profile is going to be. The other is staying in compliance. And so what we've done is we've looked at what flexibility do we have within our EDA revolving loan fund and IRP loan funds, and what flexibility can we get from the agencies. Now, I know EDA is in the process of rolling out a special COVID-related RLF using these new dollars. And I would like to recognize IEDC, NATO, all the organizations that worked hard to get this $1.5 billion that's in the CARES Act for EDA. Those of us who were working in the field in the last Great Recession, there wasn't a dime in the stimulus acts back then for EDA, which was a shame. So I expect some things will be coming out from EDA in regards to getting new RLF resources. We've been pushing them to look at ways to expedite things, to get money into existing high-performing EDA RLFs. With USDA did not get any IRP money in this first CARES Act, but as Kevin mentioned, this is the rescue package. There will be future stimulus packages there. So we're using what little available loan capital we have left to fill those immediate gaps. And of course, doing what John mentioned, providing accurate information and then helping businesses to apply through their banks and through their directly to SBA. We've been simplifying our loan process and just documenting if we have exceptions to policy for our loans, we document them because I know that you can do a lot now, but at some point the auditors are going to come back in. So we've been just documenting exceptions to policy. We've been going to all online applications, documents, what have you, so we don't have to physically visit with potential borrowers. And I know a lot of EDOs have rolled out various loan funds. The key thing that we're focused on is we're not bailing out businesses that were marginal or ready to go under, just waiting for the next recession. We're focusing our limited resources on the businesses that were successful before, and then were hit with their revenue fell off the cliff. So we're focusing on them. And we're prioritizing our business coaches, our SBDC center, our PTAC. We're prioritizing based on the importance of that business. So that is what we're in, a triage situation here. So that is what we're doing. I would reach out to your EDR, your regional EDA representative. I would reach out to your regional office. If you have the good reputation with them, which I think you do, they will help walk through how we get additional resources. And then just make sure that you're partnering with anyone you can partner with. You can go to our website, growgreatfallsmontana.org. We've got a special COVID-related resource page, but reach out to other organizations. We'll all share, as we always do. If you're starting an RLF to get through this, then don't start from scratch. Reach out to others in your region or your state. Reach out through IEDC. No reason to have to create the wheel all over again. We're all here to help. If you run out of loan capital, reach out to your banks, reach out to other EDOs. If you aren't close to your CDFIs, reach out to the CDFIs. The most important thing is to stay focused on the business clients that we're all trying to help get through this process.
Well, thank you, Brett. This is, you've brought another tool to the toolbox. And so I think we want to turn to, I also want you to know that our listeners, somebody went right away to your website and reports to you that the Great Falls website is very helpful and a good opportunity. So congratulations on that. We are now fortunate to turn to Vinny DeCara. Vinny is the founder of DeCara Training and Consulting in Brunswick, Maine. And Vinny has a variety of skills and talents. And if I went through everybody's skills and talents, we wouldn't have time for the speakers to talk. So I've just picked one small thing. But one of the things that Vinny's been really good at is figuring out how to use community development block grant disaster funds. And some of the funds in the CARES Act are in that bucket of funding. So, Vinny, can you give people a little bit of lowdown about CDBG and how that works when it's recovery money?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction. I appreciate the kind words. I want to start off with saying that I agree with almost everything that John and Brett have said. So I will be as brief as possible in talking about CDBG funds, and I will begin by mentioning a few propositions. Number one, businesses need money and need it now. It isn't that they need it 3 weeks from now or 4 weeks from now, they need it now. Second proposition is that many businesses can find monies locally being the most efficient and effective way that they can access capital. The third proposition is that many business owners do innumerable things. And when I talk about small business owners, I'm talking about the people that John was referencing. So those people not that have several hundred employees, but maybe have several employees. So they might be considered to be micro businesses in many cases. And those people who own those micro businesses might do innumerable things to keep those businesses and their doors open. So they may sweep the floors at night. They may do the payroll during the day. They may cook a meal during the day for people that come into the restaurant. So they do a variety of different things. So from a standpoint of time, they don't have very much. So any means that they have to be most effective in accessing capital is the means that is available to them and that they will use. I believe that one of those means that is available to local communities involve grants through the Community Development Block Grant Program. So some states and some communities have used those funds that they receive from the federal government for purposes of economic development and for purposes of micro enterprise development. There are three national objectives you always have to keep in mind when you talk about any CDBG funds. They are principally to benefit low and moderate income persons, aid in the prevention of slums and blight, and meet an urgent community need. I don't know of any more urgent community need now than the need to sustain small businesses in a lot of what we consider to be small communities. So from a community standpoint, the health of these businesses represents as urgent a community need as exists at this point in time. I also want to say that from a CDBG standpoint, these funds are in many ways and in many cases committed already. So it isn't that these funds can be applied for and are available. But as John indicated, I would reference people to the most local source of assistance they can find and the most local source of information they can find. That is inevitably going to be the local economic development director in a community. I have done that myself on several occasions in the last week or so, where I've told people to first start with the local economic development director in their city or town, because that individual may know of money that is available either through CDBG grants or otherwise that can be made available to businesses that need that money, not 3 or 4 weeks from now, but yesterday or today or the next day. So the quicker that you can access these funds, the more attractive they're going to be for those businesses that need them. And by those funds, I'm not talking about millions of dollars of funds. I'm talking about $5,000 or $10,000 of funds, just to keep their doors open for the next couple of weeks or so. One of the advantages, I think, of setting aside funds for business lending purposes are you're able to establish a loan fund, and you're able to then go to the banks in your community. And in most small cities and towns, we're talking about community banks, and you're talking about what can be to them a commitment of local funds that then you can use as leverage for getting funds from them through grants from them. So you may start out with a $50,000 or $75,000 fund. It may grow to $150,000 after you've spoken to a couple or three banks, because the banks in the community are probably in the mode at this point where they're looking for ways to put their capital to work to help small businesses, whether it is through an SBA program or otherwise. They would just as soon, I think, make a grant to a community to match money that has been raised by that community. So I would not be at all shy, if I were any of you, to take money that exists locally through CDBG or other means and use that money as leverage when you sit down and talk to the community banks that exist in your community. In closing, and I don't want to be very long because we're a few minutes behind schedule here, but in closing, I just want to make a pitch for technical assistance through various players that exist. The SBA funds a lot of technical assistance providers, and many businesses probably need technical assistance now more than ever. Those sources of technical assistance are identified primarily through the SBDCs that exist and the SCORE chapters that exist. I am a member of SCORE, so SCORE in my community is very, very active, and I have received a number of calls recently from small business people who are trying to access what is available to them in the, from the standpoint of grants or loans or whatever. So I would put in a pitch for those technical assistance providers and reiterate what John, I think, said a little earlier. Try to find out who those people are in your community and be ready to refer businesses to them. Those technical service providers can provide assistance both in the application process that we've been talking about today, as well as with other local resources that might exist. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Jane, and I thank you very much for the time you've given to me.
Vinny, thank you so much. And
My
you know,
pleasure.
as we always do, we are glad to have you and to hear about that. You know how it works. You have a whole group of people, and then you try to figure out, okay, how do you put this all together? And our cleanup speaker is Robin Barnes, who is a principal in resilience resolutions in New Orleans. And we all know that New Orleans, up until COVID, was sort of the master of disaster, the expert in how to handle rebuilding after Katrina and come back strong. So tell us, Robin, from your experience there, what kind of wisdom do you have for people who in every community are trying to help businesses survive and grow and thrive? Take it away, Robin.
Sure, I was on mute, sorry. Good afternoon, and thank you, Jane. Disasters tend to prompt reunions, and I've had the pleasure, under sometimes unfortunate circumstances, to have worked with many of the panelists today. I've had the opportunity to work for, or I've been on the board of a number of economic development organizations that have stood up economic and small business recovery programs within the days and weeks of major disasters, dating back to 9/11 and through Hurricanes Katrina and the subsequent disasters in Louisiana hurricanes and also the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. And my key takeaway is that it's never too early to consider the future. You've heard today that small businesses will be singularly focused on cash flow, getting cash into their business, keeping their employees employed, and spending virtually every minute of their day doing that. The opportunity that you as economic development organizations have is to help them today by thinking about tomorrow. And so I wanted to provide some perspective, and like yours, my perspective comes from working for economic development organizations, and by mission, our organizations are focused on job creation, job retention, building wealth in our communities, addressing workforce development and access to capital, influencing public policy, and the list goes on. All these activities are toward building economic resilience in our cities and regions. Therefore, your organizations are perfectly situated, and it's been stated by everybody on the call today, to help communities navigate the complex array of resources that are coming down the pike, like the ones you've heard of today. But also we have the capacity to focus on economic recovery, and it's not too early to do that. And that's what I wanted to talk about a bit today. I compiled a list of things that your organization might be doing today to maximize how the resources that are coming down the pike might be utilized to rebuild small businesses, help them get out of this horrible emergency, and rebuild local economies, even though that might take a long while. And that includes also building more resilience, so somehow when the next thing happens, we'll be better prepared. So there are 10 strategies that I'm putting forward today, and these are based on lessons learned from several disasters, but also, you know, what we could cover today, because I think all of us could talk about a lot of this stuff for a great long while. So the first thing is conduct needs assessments now on business conditions. Survey your members, the business community, for example, but also don't overlook vulnerable communities and the smallest businesses where the need may be going unseen. Goldman Sachs recently surveyed 1,500 small businesses that are part of their 10,000 small business program. Over half of those said they cannot envision operating beyond 3 months in terms of the way things stand today. So what is the current status of businesses in your community? That data that you collect will help design impactful programs that may attract additional resources or utilize the resources from future stimulus packages. Help small businesses in your community access as many of the resources for which they are eligible. As it's been stated, there will be no disaster centers stood up, so people will be looking to you. If you are not already a business assistance organization, partner with one, small business development organizations, business assistance organizations, and those who can provide technical assistance to help businesses apply for their loans. You can disseminate information and conduct webinars like this one for businesses in your community. I know that Greater New Orleans Inc. and JEDCO are doing that today. Consider creating online resource guides for small businesses. These have been effective tools, very simple to put together, but very effective, and there are a lot of models online for that. And again, consistent outreach and engagement in vulnerable communities is critical to helping those businesses in those communities learn about programs. They will not likely be on your webinars or finding your online resource guide. After Hurricane Katrina, we took small business recovery programs into the community. For example, we knew that commercial fishermen would not be comfortable traveling into New Orleans for meetings. So we held meetings at docks and restaurants they frequented and posted flyers at coffee shops and gas stations where we knew they would see them. Today, of course, that is challenging due to social distancing restrictions for sure, but community organizations will be great partners for you for that. On the topic of resources, several were mentioned today. Make it your job to drive as many federal resources to your community as possible, whether or not you are the recipient of them. Disaster-impacted communities rely on disaster economies for a period of time following an event. Small businesses will succeed post-COVID if residents are spending money, if governments and larger companies are procuring, if cash is circulating. So maximizing that funding is key. Leverage private philanthropy to fund some of the assistance that's not covered, perhaps additional technical assistance. Assist small businesses in accessing contracts for recovery activities, or even now for the emergency. We've been reading about small businesses in New Orleans and New York that have turned their distilleries into hand sanitizer manufacturing facilities. Other businesses are now manufacturing PPEs such as masks, and restaurants are feeding children, healthcare workers, and unemployed workers. Provide market research to small businesses to help them understand what their marketplace will look like post-COVID-19. What will have changed? What market opportunities might not be there, and what new ones will become options? Which sectors are likely to succeed and which are likely to fail? Small businesses do not have access to that sort of information, and if they do, they may not know how to interpret it. This may sound weird, but it's true. Monitor global trends like climate and public health and help small businesses understand how these trends will impact them like this pandemic had. No one saw this coming. Don't forget climate change. Many businesses will be reopening at the beginning of the hurricane season, making their challenges even greater. I've said it a couple of times, but don't overlook the smallest businesses and vulnerable communities. It's critical that everyone benefits from the recovery, everyone has access to resources for which they are eligible, and that we prioritize that. Here's the hard one. Help those businesses who will not succeed. We want to believe that every business should and can reopen. For some, that will not be realistic, and they will need some help getting out of business, charting a new course ahead for themselves, supporting their employees. I ran a grant, loan, and technical assistance program following 9/11 and one following Hurricane Katrina. The hardest thing we had to do was help businesses for which there was no clear future create their own exit strategy, which was sometimes not to reopen at all. And the last one, number 10, find the silver lining. We have a history of rebounding after disasters and building back in ways that are more resilient in the end. And these communities, the communities that have been through disasters, they know this. It's a possibility. It's hard to see that now, but that is something that you all can do and just, be on the lookout for that silver lining. And that's what I've got. Thank you.
Robin, that is so helpful. And I got from the questions that people were saying they couldn't write fast enough. Is there any chance those 10 ideas are something that you could share with IEDC and that the participants on the website could get them?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I will share them so they'll be available.
That would make a huge difference. Now, this is our time for questions, and in reviewing the questions, many of the questions are questions that are a little bit more technical kind of questions about the act itself. And we have communicated with Kevin, and she indicated that her team will put together answers to the questions that we have on this chat box. So the IEDC team will kind of, consolidate so that similar questions will go together, and we'll have basically a new version of frequently asked questions, which is frequently asked questions by the economic development officers who are part of the IEDC team. And we will get those to you as we communicate with the participants. So that is something that's there. But if anybody has questions for this team of economic development professionals, now is your moment to write in on the chat box. And I know that we have also in the studio audience the leader of IEDC, Jeff Finkel. And I don't know if, Jeff, you have any brilliant thoughts for anyone.
Jane, thank you. What I will do is I will read a couple of these questions. Brett Downey got a question from Paul Saldana, and it says, greetings from your fellow AEDO in Tulare County. CARES Act has money for EDA to hire folks to help with the RLF. How will that impact the rollout of programs? And also, our area has no EDA revolving loan fund money. Shouldn't that be a priority as well? Thanks, Paul.
Hey, Paul. If you don't have a revolving loan fund in your community or region, now is the perfect time to start one. Every area should have it. There will always be gaps in what various government programs and what the private sector can do. And we found that having a little bit of gold that we can bring to the table is a very key part of our economic development strategy. In terms of EDA, we all know they don't have slack staff. It's not like they had a bunch of people sitting around not doing anything. So thank heaven somebody listened to smart people in congressional staff, and they gave money for EDA to hire people. But the earlier you get things in, and the more you communicate, certainly don't start an EDA application without talking with your EDR, talking with your regional office. There's no such thing as over communication.
Jane, the one thing I would add to this is IEDC has put a ton of resources on a website called restoreyoureconomy.org. We will be continuing to add to that website. I would encourage people looking for potential business surveys, various tools. We'll be adding these federal government resources as regulations come out and as we understand them greater. But there is just a ton of information on restoreyoureconomy.org. I don't know if you look at the last two or three questions, Jane, there's a couple more that would be helpful for the group to answer.
All right, so I'm looking. One of the questions that was, someone said, what are the most basic steps that someone could take to help a business keep their doors open? Anybody want to take
John,
that one
I'll
up?
start. Yeah, I'll start, but then I know that probably everybody else can also join in. Very quickly, going backwards, I'm a New Yorker, even though I'm in Minot, North Dakota, so I do tend to talk fast, so I apologize if some of what I said went by quickly. For the PPP loan, the statute actually, the CARES Act actually prioritizes that these loans should go through SBA 7A commercial bank lending partners with the SBA. But it also gives the secretary the discretion to work it through other commercial banks. And as you heard from Kevin, you should also, if you know a bank or banks, commercial, in your area that are actively involved in the SBA 504 lending program, you should reach out to them too, because the odds are they're also going to be sources to receive the applications. There's also, and I'm still learning this one, but if you have credit unions in your community, I would reach out to them. They'll know if they have a relationship with the SBA or not. But those are the three primary sources for the PPP. In terms of this question, your initial role really is to pick up again on what everyone, Robin and Vinny and Brett all said, is that our point of contact, most critical for every small business, is to be a technical resource, to basically calm the waters with all of this confusing, good information, but it's going to be overwhelming for the average small business, to provide them with a resource to kind of calm the waters and get them thinking about which way they want to go and which source of assistance they want to get. And if you do have a local resource, as Brett has talked about, in terms of local RLFs, that can certainly be a starting point. In fact, I know of a lot of communities that are considering immediate bridge loans to literally bridge the small businesses to get access to these different assistance programs. So that's something else to keep in mind. I know there's a lot of optimism. I hope it is true, but any of you that have gone through disasters and have gone through the disaster loan program, regardless of best of intentions and regardless of the optimism, we need to be prepared that this is going to take longer than we're being told it's going to take. And again, as a primary point of resource, we need to be cognizant of that and continue to track it. One of the things I would encourage you to do, and then I'll turn it over to the other panelists, is, and I do this on a daily basis, the first thing in the morning, I look at the EDA website, I look at the HUD website, I look at the IRS website, I look at the FEMA website, and I look at the SBA website. And I look and see what's today, what's working, what's not working. The SBA site, both for the economic injury loan application and for the PPP, has crashed multiple times in the last 48 hours. In fairness to all the different federal agencies, they've never had to encounter the breadth and depth of disaster response that they're having to encounter today, or will probably have to encounter for the next 2 months. Remember that a typical disaster, whether it's a tornado, a flood, or any of the natural disasters that many of us had to live through, it's a defined period of time. It's usually no more than 4 days from the way the event starts to it ends. Just hear all the different news briefings every day nationally. This is going to be going on for 8 to 12 weeks. So this is highly unusual. So the capacity or the ability for us to respond to help the small businesses is going to be extraordinarily unusual. So again, your primary resource for your small businesses is to calm the waters.
I want to reiterate something that John said a couple of minutes ago. He was talking about credit unions. In some communities, especially smaller communities, credit unions are big players in the sense of lending money to businesses. So you might have, in a small community, a credit union or two or three or more that do as much lending as commercial banks do. So in reaching out to those entities that lend money to businesses, don't exclude credit unions because they could very well be big players in your communities.
This is
Absolutely.
Brett Doney.
Go ahead, Brett. Go ahead.
Brett.
No. Well, I just
wanted to say
intentionally they're trying to make it many different kind of financial institutions. So,
well, one of the key things Jane, in a disaster is that debt may not be the best answer. So we've been focused far more on strategies to generate cash if there's any types of generation possible. But we decided, our staff team this morning decided we're going to start taking a two-track approach. One is helping essential businesses that have been declared by our governor as essential. They're struggling with having to adapt with how do I operate and keep my essential business running. So strategies for that. The other is strategies to help companies go into essentially hibernation or some level of hibernation. And it could be for weeks, it could be for months. And how do we help them survive? And we like the term hibernation because we want as many companies as possible to survive this and come back out of hibernation when they're able to.
Well, and I think the other piece that has not been mentioned, and again, this act passed Friday night, so I mean we're really dealing with an unknown. As we try to sort it out, it's unclear. The United States Chamber of Commerce Foundation has put out a piece about what's in it for small businesses and nonprofits, and for the essential businesses in particular, one of the pieces in there is that if a business businesses are required to provide paid sick leave to an employee who can't come to work because either they're under quarantine for COVID, or they have to care for a family member who is, or all of a sudden their kids are home and they have to care for their kids, that it doesn't apply if someone can work from home remotely. But for some of the essential businesses, if you have someone who they want them to come to work, but they can't because all of a sudden they've got their kids at home or whatever, there may be a possibility of a reimbursement for that additional paid sick leave that you're providing for someone specifically related to the COVID activities. Those rules have not been developed yet, but it is something to watch for.
Jane, this is Jeff again. There were two questions that I think maybe Robin Barnes could start and others could jump onto. The one question was, how are you dealing with duplication of efforts, lack of collaboration between EDOs at various levels? And second, how do you start the whole notion of developing an economic recovery program? We're taking it back to basics a little bit. Robin would have a good sense of where we should begin, I would think.
Sure.
Take it away, Robin.
Okay. So the dealing with duplication of efforts is always challenging, and in my opinion, so if you're, say, the Regional Economic Development Organization, for example, you have this opportunity because you already have a natural relationship with the local economic development organizations to become the convener, to hold regular meetings. I heard on another call that the Greater Houston Partnership was doing this, for example. So you have to kind of take the bull by the horns and become that coordinator, become that convener, and just start doing it. Set up the weekly call and ask people to, talk about what services and resources they're providing. Start putting that information into a resource guide, to show people kind of how it's starting to fall out. So duplication of efforts and redundancy can be an extremely good thing if it's done strategically, whether we're talking about by neighborhood or by sector. But it is going to take one organization to really look at all of that and to start sorting through it and start focusing on coordination. One thing I can promise you that is if you're the one that knows and understands all the information, over time people will gravitate to you. So it behooves you to really understand the details. As John said, read it, read the act, because you're and participate on these sorts of webinars and call your colleagues and ask questions and call the state and really get the information, because if you have the knowledge, you'll become the leader. In terms of sort of an economic development program, this is something I sort of forgot to mention, but it actually is important to think about these things programmatically. Right now, they're just a bunch of resources that can all be accessed individually. But over time, we need to look at sort of programs that serve different populations and pull in various resources and leverage philanthropy, for example, and bring together partners. And again, it's going to take an organization or a small group of organizations that take the lead on that, because there isn't going to be that local lead from government, from the feds, in the way there has been in the past. So I think that's a starting point to the answer to the question.
The other question that someone asked is, as we're looking at how these programs come together, that if someone gets a grant from a state and local community, and then they are able to also get a federal grant, there doesn't appear to be anything in the law that prohibits that kind of duplication. It's just that the federal law says you can't have the same expense be covered by two different federal sources, which is why you have to choose if you're going to do an economic injury loan or a payroll protection or a tax credit. And some of that, while the economic injury loan and the payroll protection loan are designed to work together, you can only have the portion forgiven for one set of dollars that used to protect the payroll. But if you're, for example, a C6, which we were talking about earlier, the Payroll Protection Act doesn't cover you, but the economic injury loan does cover you. So there's really, everyone's going to have to look at these programs in the context of their own business or their own organization, because some are businesses, some are not-for-profits that are working with businesses. And I think we're going to be, as someone said, I'm forgetting who, that this is completely unprecedented for the breadth of the problem and for the duration of the problem. And so what we really have to do is continually be in conversation. And that's why I think it's so important that IEDC's created the Restore Your Economy website so that it can be continually updated, because I love it, John, that you wake up every morning and read every single website, but that's because that's your job. If your job is as a small business and you're trying to figure out how to operate a gas station, probably you're not going to be able to do that. But I think, as Robin says, what you guys want to be is the one who the businesses think, okay, these guys understand it, so we'll make one call, help, what can we do? And the Restore Your Economy gives you a framework to try to figure out for your particular businesses. And my understanding, and Jeff, you can certainly climb in, that this webinar series will be an ongoing activity.
Jane, next week we have Richard Florida and Professor Stephen Pedigo. The week after that, we're going to be talking about technology, tools that economic development organizations can use to that may be free to help work our way through the recovery. And the following week, we've got Stan Gamont, former head of the CDBG program, how to get money on the street as quickly as possible using CDBG.
Great.
Jane, this is John. If I could, to pick up on what you just said, just to offer, going back to wearing my FEMA hat, my past FEMA hat, and my CDBG disaster recovery hat. The Stafford Act, which will apply to this, has a provision called duplication of benefit when you're talking about getting state, local, other federal grants in addition to the SBA. It appears in this statute, but no one has actually spoken to it, and I'm kicking myself for not having asked you to ask Kevin this question. But it appears in these 335 pages that the duplication of benefit requirements under the Stafford Act and the November 2011 rules that were issued for all federal agencies doesn't apply. But just to caution everybody, especially in terms of when they talk about technical assistance, I would be cognizant of that statutory requirement, but at the same time, the good news is that if the duplication of benefits statute does kick in, it's not your problem, it's not the small business applicant's problem, it's the SBA's problem. Without going into details about those of you that don't know what the duplication of benefit requirement is, whatever federal agency is pushing out disaster assistance money, whether it's grant or loan, if they're the lead agency, they are required to do a duplication of benefit assessment to make sure that the federal money is not paying for the same purpose that other money is already paid for. It's up to that entity. So in this case, if it does kick in, it will be up to the Small Business Administration. But I just think that everybody should be cognizant of that. And then it's a little advice. It only takes about a half an hour to 45 minutes to scan all the websites that I cited, and only do it after your fourth cup of coffee.
There you go. Okay. So we're starting to hear people saying that they've got to check out. And will there be a follow-up? And my understanding is that IEDC will send a follow-up. And one of the probably most important things is that the follow-up will include the questions with answers that Kevin is able to provide to the extent possible from the Small Business Committee. And, you know, as she said, this is an ongoing situation. So I think if you have any questions you want to stick in there, we will do our level best to try to put them in a reasonable sense and send them off to Kevin, and she will get them back to us, and we will get them back to you. So let's have last words of wisdom, and we should do it in the reverse order. So Robin, why don't you give us your last words of wisdom?
I think my last words of wisdom are reiterating what I said at the beginning, which is that it's not too early to think about the recovery. It's not too early to think about next year, because sometimes the decisions you make today and small businesses are making today need to take into account assumptions for the future. So just stay focused on the future.
Great. Okay. Going backwards from our order, we now go to Vinny. Give us.
Yes, I will reiterate
something
that I said here. Thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for attending today's webinar. And my reiteration is that, and this is something that I think you've heard before, it is that the more local you can be to get the assistance that you need, if you're a small business, the better off you're going to be, because that is probably the level at which the money will be more available to you and be available to you quicker. So keep in touch with the locality that you exist in.
Got it. Brett.
Take care of yourself, take care of your partners, take care of your clients. This is going to be a long haul. It's not a sprint. It's not a marathon. This is an ultra distance thing. So let's take care of each other and make it through this. And we will make it through.
We will. John.
Thank you, Jane. First, I want to thank you for moderating this. It, to some extent, was like herding cats, but you did a really great job. And of course, I want to acknowledge Jeff. I want to acknowledge Jeff Finkel and the entire IEDC staff that have put this together, for putting this together and having this webinar. And I would encourage, there was future webinars that were posted a little while ago on the site. I would encourage you all on this call to take advantage of those. I would also reiterate what John and Jane and Jeff have already said, which is, if you still have questions, please shoot them out. We'll get to answer every one of them. The IEDC has a wealth of resources. And my advice would be, we are going to be a clear point of contact. I would remain calm. I would not allow yourself to get overwhelmed. And just keep remembering, as Brett and Robin and Vinny have all said, as well as Jane and Jeff have said, we're in the middle of a firestorm, but we will get through this, just like we have every other disaster that this country has faced, whether it's regionally or nationally. And take care of yourself, just like Brett said.
Okay, well, Jeff, do you want to have the word of brilliance?
Jane, you were a fabulous moderator. That's the best brilliance I can come up with. And thank you for leading us today.
Well, you're sweet. I really enjoyed it. I care an awful lot about how this works, and I think that IEDC does remarkable work, and each of you as members do it. So hang in there. We're going to get you the best answers we can, and thank you. Stay well, stay healthy, wash your hands. Take care. Bye.